Well, I'm back to doing some more work on the Bel Air. I did a ton of work yesterday. I got the vacuum hooked up for the brake booster, so I have power brakes and they actually work pretty good. I spent a whole bunch of time working on my clutch because I had bought a new master cylinder for the clutch and a new line, the correct, it's like half rubber and half steel line. And I spent a bunch of time getting that in yesterday. So let me show you how the clutch looks now. Totally different setup, and it's a little bit better. So at first glance, clutch looks the same until you get down here and you look at this big kerfuffle of stuff here. So part of the reason the clutch wasn't working before, I found out, is that the clutch rod was not going in far enough. It was only moving probably about an inch, inch and a quarter, and it needs closer to an inch and a half, maybe an inch and 5/8 of movement. So these U-bolts here are preventing the clutch rod from dropping down, also limiting the range of travel of the clutch rod. And in order to get the right length of travel on here, I added this extra piece of linkage, drilled a hole further down in my clutch pedal, and now the clutch is pretty stiff. It's quite a bit stiffer than it was before, but the beauty of this clutch rod is the factory one that comes from a 1986 C10 up to like a 1989, 90, 91 GMC Jimmy that had a 4-speed manual. So the master cylinder is 100% factory. This rod is 100% factory. This is just a 1/2-inch bolt, some U-bolts that I got from a set of springs, and all the rest of this stuff I made. But it's a really, really, really stiff pedal now. The clutch works phenomenally well, better than it has since I put it in this car. Again, it looks a little bit janky, but it works perfectly well. I do probably need to put some nylon bushings on this to give it a little bit of material to rub, because right now it's all metal on metal, but it works really well. And now you can see again the blue shifter a little bit better in the daylight here that the car's outside. So now that the clutch is figured out and the brakes are figured out, next couple things I need to work on are getting the motor to run a little bit better. Right now it's hard starting. I think the distributor is a little bit too far advanced. I think the last time I had worked on it, I don't remember if I had started the timing at, I don't know, 15 or 20 degrees advance, because I wanted 35 degrees full timing. I don't know why I wanted to do that. I don't think the cam needs it, so I'm gonna work on the timing a little bit. I also don't have great signal on the carburetor at idle when it's cold, so I plan on pulling the carburetor off. I had stuck a 1-inch adapter or a 1-inch spacer underneath the carburetor. I think I'm going to take that out and see if it runs okay without it, or if it runs any better without it. Really doesn't need it necessarily, because this intake manifold is massive. This is a Professional Products Crosswind. It's basically the same thing as a Edelbrock Performer RPM air gap, and this is rated up to 7,000 RPM. It's really too big for these heads, really too big for this motor, because it's only a 305 and it's only got a 470 lift cam in it. So really it doesn't need a carburetor that big, but I wanted to put it in anyway. I mean, it doesn't need an intake that big. The carburetor is only a 600 CFM vacuum secondary, and it works really well the way it's set up. But I'm going to try to go ahead and take that spacer out, see if I can get a better signal out of the carburetor, get it to idle better when it's cold. The choke is hooked up. If I crank the choke on, it really doesn't help it warm up much, and the engine doesn't seem to run right until it gets up to about 180, 190 degrees. Then it'll idle. Otherwise, it just won't idle. So that's what I'm working on now. Once I get the timing fixed and the carburetor squared away, hopefully I'll be able to get it to run a little bit better. I do think I'm going to have to look at the valves on this side of the motor. I'm going to adjust them again. I did them quite a while ago, probably almost 2 years ago now at this point. And it was, you know, late in the year. Again, I didn't really have the engine that warmed up, so I'm going to pull this valve cover off and adjust the valves on this side of the motor, because this side of the motor sounds different out the exhaust than the other side does, which is usually an indication that your valves are either out of adjustment or your cam is wearing out. And knowing the history on this motor, it could actually be that the cam is wearing out, because my buddy had this in a 63 or a 64 Nova SS, the shoebox Nova, previous to me getting it, and I know he over revved this motor past 7 grand a couple of times, probably every time he drove it, because that's just who he is. He likes to push things, even though it's a 305, and again, the cam's probably only rated for 5,500 RPM or something like that. He does like to push things. So I know the motor's been over revved. It may be hurt inside. It does have quite a bit of blow by at idle as well. So, you know, anything over idle, like 1,500 RPM, it produces enough vacuum that it can suck the vapor out and burn it the correct way. But at idle, this breather, you will see just a ton of vapor coming out. So could be the rings, maybe it has a cracked ring in a couple of the cylinders. I do remember when I tested the compression on this side of the motor, 1 or 2 cylinders were a little bit less than the rest of them, which again could indicate it has a cracked ring, or it could just be, you know, coincidence that it's like that. Who knows? Flat top pistons. I mean, the motor doesn't have that many miles on it, but it's been rebuilt several times by different people. I know the heads that are on this came off of 2 different motors. I bought them off of eBay from one seller, but from 2 different motors. One of them has flat bottom valves. One of them has slightly concave bottom valve. So who knows what it is, but I'm going to go ahead and start working on the carburetor, and then I'll work on the timing, and we'll see where we go from there. Well, here's something that I totally forgot in my messing around with carburetors, going from a 600 Edelbrock to a 500 and then to a 750 double pumper just to see if I could get it to run better, and then to this Holley. I forgot I put an open plenum spacer in it. Normally, if you're having a signal issue with your carburetor, or if you can't get it to idle well because there's not enough vacuum, putting an open spacer on it is not going to help. Usually putting a 4-hole spacer will help a little bit, and I believe I have a 2-inch thick 4-hole spacer that I could stick under this. And the only reason I really want to put a 2-inch 4-hole spacer under the carburetor is because I want the carburetor to sit higher on the engine to make it look cooler. But realistically, it's probably going to be a detriment on this motor, because I don't need it necessarily. But I'm going to leave the studs that were on this with the 1-inch spacer and just run the nuts all the way down, tighten it up, see if it runs any better like it is. Again, tweak the timing a little bit, adjust the carburetor, and see if it runs any better. If it does, great. If not, I may try the 2-inch 4-hole spacer just to see if it changes anything. Here comes the fun part of trying to get the timing better. So I got to start the car up, get it to idle around 1,000 RPM, tweak the timing till I get it where I want it. I'm going to try to get it between 12 and 15 degrees, and then lock it in place and see if it runs any better. The problem, can't get it to stay running long enough to adjust it. almost out of gas too. The gas that's in here is 2 years old, so I'm pretty sure I probably just ran it out of gas. Let's turn off the ignition for now. Let the fan run for a bit, because actually it's pretty good. It's up at 185. It's got a 195 degree thermostat, so the thermostat didn't even quite open yet, but the gas in this thing is really old. I was waiting for it to run out of gas because I wanted to change the fitting on the fuel cell. I really didn't like the fitting that I have on the fuel cell in here. Mainly because it's a, I think it was like a 90-degree bend that somebody cut the end off and turned it into a straight one. But this guy here, this little short stub, there's no ribbing or anything on it, so I'm always worried that this line's gonna come off, but it probably won't. But realistically, yeah, I've had mice in here, I know I have. I'm sure I'm probably out of gas. The gas that I had in here was so old. Another thing that could be causing me some weird running issues is the fact that the plugs in this are 2 years old, and I basically just started up and shut it off and started up and shut it off. Never really gets to a point where it gets hot enough to clean the plugs up. And I don't have my vacuum advance hooked up on my distributor, mainly because when I had it hooked up, it didn't run very good with it either. It just seemed to be more of a detriment, so I disconnected it, but definitely seems to be running okay. A little bit better. Like I said, I might be out of fuel, so let me check that and see if I feel like doing anything else on this today. But just in the timing, dropping the carburetor down seemed to help a little bit. Maybe not that much, but I don't know. It always seems like it doesn't want to idle, ever. Even when it's pretty hot, so. Far from perfect, but it runs.